Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about Sherlock Holmes short stories that you might not have heard of, but should probably give a chance. So there are so many Sherlock Holmes stories, and I'm not talking about the multitude of adaptations and spin-offs and whatnot. I'm talking about just the original works by Arthur Conan Doyle. There's a total of 4 novels and 56 short stories. However, there are a few of those that get all the attention. The Hound of the Baskervilles, The Final Problem, A Scandal in Bohemia. There are a few that just are so well known, and then many that most people haven't heard of. Now, I'm not saying the well-known ones aren't as good as people say. In fact, I would say that The Hound of the Baskervilles is probably my personal favorite Sherlock Holmes story. However, there are some hidden gems there too, and I wanted to focus on those today. These stories I'm about to highlight come from throughout the Sherlock Holmes timeline, from the very first collection of short stories to the very last one. This is not order of importance or quality or personal preference or whatever. It's just in chronological order. The first one I want to talk about is The Adventure of the Copper Beeches. The Adventure of the Copper Beeches follows a young woman who has been hired as a governess and goes to Sherlock Holmes because she thinks that there's something a little bit sketchy about her employers. Turns out, of course, she's absolutely right. I feel like this is a really interesting story with a compelling mystery and an interesting twist. It's not exactly what one would normally expect because it's not a murder mystery. What's going on turns out to be a completely different crime. However, the whole situation just presents such an intriguing premise, and the way that it unfolds is just so well written and so interesting. I think The Adventure of the Copper Beeches is definitely one of my favorite Sherlock Holmes short stories. Next up is The Adventure of the Silver Blaze. Now, you may not have heard of the title of this one, but there's a quote from it that you've almost certainly heard of. The curious incident of the dog in the nighttime. Yeah, that's this one. So the quote is really popular, but the short story itself, from what I can tell, doesn't have quite the notoriety that Sherlock Holmes encounters with, for example, Irene Adler and Moriarty do. But it's very well written, very interesting, and I'd highly recommend giving it a try. Number 3 on my list is The Adventure of the Greek Interpreter, which is the story in which Sherlock Holmes' brother Mycroft is introduced. I like the contrast between the two brothers. I like seeing Sherlock Holmes deal with someone who is even more intelligent than him, but also kind of lazy and doesn't really have it in him to go, do things or investigate for himself. I think that it's a really interesting contrast and an interesting dynamic, so I can't really remember a huge amount about the plot of The Greek Interpreter, although I do remember that I enjoyed it. But I really like the character of Mycroft and how he's contrasted with Holmes. The Adventure of the Naval Treaty is a little bit different. It's political intrigue, it's a stolen treaty document, and the question of what happened to it. It's not exactly a mystery in the sense of, whodunit, but it kind of is because it's who took the treaty. But as far as, it's not, there's a dead body and we've got to investigate who killed them. Still, I think it's a really compelling plot and a really interesting twist, and so I liked it a lot and I would highly recommend checking it out. Number 5 is probably partially just because it appeals to me on a personal basis, but The Adventure of the Dancing Men. I am a huge language nerd, okay? I love language and literature and words, and so the idea of a mystery that's centered around breaking a code, that's fascinating to me. I love it. However, the fact that I like that about it would probably make me even more critical of it if it wasn't done well, so I would say that it's definitely done well and that it's definitely a very intriguing premise. Number 6, Charles Augustus Milverton. Seriously, he is fascinating, he is fantastic. He's terrible, he's awful, but the story surrounding him and how it plays out, it's fascinating. So, he's not a murderer, he's a blackmailer. He's a murder victim, but the main thing about him is he's a blackmailer. And the whole story centers around his career as a blackmailer and one of his victims who's finally had enough. So, yeah, it's a very interesting premise. Number 7 is The Adventure of the Abbey Grange. This one kind of reminds me of Murder on the Orient Express in that, it's a very different situation and it's not quite the same solution, but it's one where the murder victim is so despicable and the circumstances under which they were murdered make the perpetrators look so sympathetic that the detective ultimately lets them off the hook. I think that's kind of interesting. I think that, 99% of the time, of course, you want to see the killer brought to justice, but I kind of like mystery stories that explore really complex situations like this, or like Murder on the Orient Express, or for a darker take on the idea, And Then There Were None, where each murder victim is a murderer themselves. Number 8 on my list is the Bruce Partington plans. Now, this is kind of a combination of two, subgenres of Sherlock Holmes story. There's the political intrigue ones, like A Scandal in Bohemia or the Naval Treaty or whatever, and then there's the traditional murder mystery ones. This combines them both, because there's important documents that were stolen, and there's also a dead body, so it's kind of a best of both worlds situation. You get both sides of what the Sherlock Holmes stories are mainly about, so the Bruce Partington plans, I would say, is definitely one of the more interesting stories out there. Number 9, The Adventures of the Three Garridebs. Now, I honestly couldn't tell you anything about the plot from this one. I know it was about a guy who needed to find other people who had the same last name as him, but then it all turned out to be kind of a trick. And it's been a while since I read it, so I'm not totally clear on exactly how that played out. But what I do remember very clearly is that Dr. Watson was injured and Sherlock Holmes freaked out. And over the course of the stories, Sherlock Holmes is a fairly static character, but he does evolve slightly, and in the later ones you start to see him behave in ways that are a little bit more human. And I think that the scene where he absolutely loses it over Watson being injured just really shows how much he's grown to care for him and how much more empathetic he's become as a person, even if he normally doesn't show it. And then number 10, The Adventure of the Illustrious Client. And I have only 2 words for you here. Kitty Winter. She is fantastic. She's one of my favorite minor, obscure, nobody's ever heard of her Sherlock Holmes characters. And that's the only story that she appears in. So, gotta put that on my list. Kitty is this guy's former mistress, and he did not do right by her. And now she is here to expose his dirty secrets and keep another young woman from falling victim to his unpleasant ways. She's not entirely a heroic character. I mean, definitely she's sympathetic and she's doing the right thing, but she also pours acid on the guy's face. She's fascinating, though. Absolutely fascinating. I love her. More adaptations should use her. More people should go read the story. And, yeah. So those are my top 10 lesser-known Sherlock Holmes stories. What are your favorites? Feel free to leave a comment down below. And if you like this and you want to see more from me, be sure to subscribe. Normally I post videos twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. For this month, I've scaled back to only once a week, but I'll be back to twice a week next month, so stay tuned for lots more.